Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Hunted, which is episode 11 of season 3 of Star Trek Next Generation. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the episode The Hunted. So The Hunted is the episode where the Federation is orbiting a planet who is vying for membership in the Federation. And they get asked to help hunt down an escaped prisoner. So they do, but the prisoner is very cunning and outwits them, and eventually they capture him. But then Troy talks to him and finds out that he was actually a soldier who was genetically enhanced to fight wars, and he actually committed no crimes. They just threw him in a colony that really is a prison just because they can't allow these genetically enhanced super soldiers to integrate back into society, and they just keep them in prison until they need them in the wars again. So Picard is very angry about this, and he protests to the Prime Minister, but the Prime Minister is an arrogant dick who says this is none of your business and just wants him to transfer Roga Danar back to the prison. But when they try to transfer Roga Danar, just like in episode of 24, he escapes and is very outwits Data and Worf and manages to beam aboard the ship that was there to pick him up. He uses that ship to stage a prison break, and then he's wreaking havoc on the homeworld. He's heading for the government, and so the Prime Minister asks for help. So Picard beams down. Instead of helping them, he just berates him for treating their soldiers like shit and says that what they really need to do is integrate them back into society. And then the super soldiers all come in and they hold everyone hostage, but Picard figures out that they're kind of like the Predators. So if you don't shoot at them, if you don't have weapons aimed at them, they cannot kill you because they're only programmed to kill threats. So everyone keeps their weapons down, and the Prime Minister says, well, if you return to your prison, we will think about negotiating you returning to society. And Roga Danar says, yeah, you can take that plane and go fuck yourself. You're going to have to force us by force to make us go back to the prison, or else we are staying. And then he goes to Picard. He's like, Picard, do something, call your ship. And Picard's like, okay, yeah, good idea. And he just fucks off. He beams back on the Enterprise and leaves, and then tells Riker that he believes that the Prime Minister will choose to survive and that the Federation will return to help them deprogram the super soldiers and integrate them back into society. So it's funny, a lot of comments or reviews I've read about this episode said that it's either okay or really terrible. I like this episode. I always liked this episode. It's not one of my favorites. It never was one of my favorites. I wouldn't put this in any top 40 or anything like that. But I liked it well enough. I think that the message of how poorly veterans are treated, particularly in the U.S. This was definitely a commentary on how the U.S. treats its veterans very poorly, like send them off to wars, and then the benefits they get upon the return is very poor. And like in earlier ages, like after World War II or the Vietnam War, when African American soldiers returned, they were still treated like second-class citizens and treated like dirt and couldn't get jobs, even though that they risked their lives for the country and suffered. Many of them, of course, suffered from PTSD, and you have all sorts of other controversies and stuff like that. And yeah, you always hear about veterans who didn't get the mental help that they needed and that they deserved, or that were just left in the cold to starve and not taken care of. So I think that message actually comes across really strongly in this episode, and I think it's done well. Also, I think this is a good Troy episode. I think she is. There's not every episode, and this is what I'm noticing as I go through the show, is that they didn't really know how to write for her. In fact, I was just watching some interviews with the writers I can't remember which one, maybe Ronald D. Moore, Brown Borrega, or Renee Echevarria, one of those, were saying that they never could figure out how to write for Troy. And then Marina Sirtis talked about how she wanted her character to more for her character to do and her character to be fleshed out more. And so I can't remember which writer, but one of the writers was like, okay, could you have any ideas of what Troy would like? And she's like, well, I'm not the writer, you come up with it. And now, 25 years later, 30 years later, she says, I realized that was the wrong response, that as an actor I should have put in my input and should have helped the writers come up with something for Troy instead of just expecting them to do it, which is probably true. But anyway, point is, as I'm going through the show and noticing that they don't really know what to do with Troy a lot of times, when they do know what to do with Troy and when they utilize her correctly and make her seem like a interesting, fleshed out character, I appreciate it because it doesn't happen often. It's kind of the rare treat. So I always noted in my review, when I review an episode, where Troy comes off really well, and I think this is a good example of them. And also, Marina Sirtis' acting always is way better when the writers know what to do with her, which is why I disagreed with everyone saying she was a bad actor. It's just she was being written poorly most of the time. When she was written well, she turned in good performances. Now, this is one of her best. Like I talked about in The Survivors, that was one of her best. And, of course, Face of the Enemy over in the 6th season's the singular best. But it was a decent performance, but more to the point, the writing was good on her. It utilized the fact that she was a counselor and the fact that she cared, and the conversations between her and Roger Danar were really good. To me, it was the heart of the episode. In fact, I feel like I heard some opinions saying that the episode kind of dipped in the middle, and I actually disagree. If anything, I think it dipped during these long chase scenes. I think the middle part, when Troy was talking to Roger Danar and when Data was talking to Roger Danar, were actually the most interesting parts of the episode. Now, before I go any further, I did want to mention Lower Decks and how Roger Danar was called out and mentioned in Lower Decks. I just watched this episode too, and I still can't remember the exact context. It was something like Boimler was talking about who the biggest badass in history was, and he said Roger Danar, and the Mariner was making fun of him, saying, who the fuck is Roger Danar? Nobody knows who that is, which is kind of a meta joke, because it's like, and Mike McGann always talked about how the characters in Lower Decks were just surrogates for Star Trek fans, because you could see this is a conversation that Star Trek fans would have amongst each other if someone said Roger Danar was their favorite character or biggest badass. Someone who's not a big, huge geek and obsessed with the show like I am might be like, who the hell is Roger Danar? Because he's not as commonly now known as Khan, and so that's who Mariner picked. So Mariner's like, how can you pick Roger Danar when Khan's right there? Khan is easily the biggest badass, and sort of making fun of Boimler for picking someone so obscure that not many people would know who he is. But you know what? I'm actually with Boimler in this one. But you know my feelings on Khan. Well, if you've seen my channel, I think he's overrated. I'm not a huge fan of Khan. Huge fan of the Wrath of Khan, but that's different. Not a particularly huge fan of Khan. So I actually think I agree that Roger Danar is better. I mean, he's certainly a bigger badass. All Kirk had to do was beat Khan over the head with the metal pod or metal rod or whatever, and or hit him in the back with it and knock him out. Whereas Roger Danar was much, much fucking harder to beat. Like, they had like 5 people trying to pin him down. Of course, you didn't have the magical special power of Kirk, who has to win everything. But anyway, that's why I like Next Generation better than the original series. It's frustrating because I'm watching all these interviews with these writers who were on the Next Generation during season 3 and 2, like Melinda Snodgrass and a few others, and they were like, "Oh, I'm sorry, but the original series is better." And I'm sorry, but it's not. It just isn't. I'm sorry, it just isn't. But anyway, that's a Coke versus Pepsi, Star Wars versus Star Trek type argument. But the Next Generation is objectively better, by the way. But anyway, why I'm way off topic. Point is, it's interesting that they were comparing Rogadena to Khan, because they're both genetically enhanced super soldiers. And they didn't bring that up. I thought they would mention that. I thought Boimler would point out the fact that, Rogadena is also genetically enhanced. But no, he didn't point it out. Interesting. But, anywho, so let's stay on that topic about genetically enhanced, because I've heard some people complain about some of the naysayers of this episode, that is dumb that the Federation, that the Federation is considering, I think, are they the Mandozans, or oh god, I gotta look up the name of them. The stupid aliens that James Cromwell plays the Prime Minister, the planet that they're on. They're being considered for the Federation, to join the Federation. God damn it, it's not saying the name. Oh well, I'll just move without it. But anyway, so they're being considered to join the Federation. A lot of people complain about it, thinking that's unrealistic, because of the way they treated their soldiers. Now, granted, they didn't know at this stage they treated their soldiers this way. This was a surprise, but then you get the extra criticism of why didn't they know? They should have done their research before considering them to join the Federation, which, of course, the real, true, and, only objective answer to that is because of plot convenience, because it's necessary for the plot. But anyway, but the other criticism is, well, Starfleet and the Federation are so totally against genetic engineering. It's a big no-no, to the point of them being completely prejudiced. But the thing is, you're using your modern-day knowledge to come to that conclusion, especially if you've watched Strange New Worlds. Because, yes, this was first brought up in, as I talked about before, Deep Space Nine Season 5, which hasn't happened yet. So, and I talked about this in the Season 2 episode of TNG that I already covered. Was it Unnatural Selection? Because this actually featured Federation scientists genetically engineering children, and the Starfleet and the Federation seem to have zero problems with this, and this absolutely 1,000% goes against how we're seeing that Starfleet and the Federation has behaved ever since the eugenics wars. So basically for its entire existence. So that is stands outside of canon. And the thing is, and I mentioned in that episode, is because it hadn't been come up with yet. Like, they didn't come up with this whole thing about Starfleet being against, totally prejudiced and against genetic engineering until Deep Space Nine. Or maybe it was sometime earlier, but definitely not this early. I think it was Season 5 of Deep Space Nine, the Dr. Bashir, I presume, episode. I think it was the first time it was mentioned. And then, of course, the modern Trek sort of took that and ran with it and made it a regular feature. But it wasn't there before, not during this time. So I wouldn't expect that to be something that Starfleet would rule out this planet from joining the Federation, because in Season 2 they were doing it themselves. So this wasn't a thing yet in this point and stage in Next Generation timeline. So that's okay. Now, as far as these aliens being completely not eligible to join the Federation, it being a bit ridiculous that they're even being considered. I actually don't think that's the case. I think there's much worse aliens that were considered to join the Federation, particularly when we get to season 7, the episode Attached. You meet the Kesprit, and half of the planet wants to join the Federation, and you find out that they're all a bunch of paranoid, conspiracy theory nut jobs. And so why would they even send the Enterprise there? What kind of investigation are they even doing? Why would they even consider admitting half of the planet? And if we go to the original series, there's an example of a planet that is already in the Federation that has absolutely no business being in the Federation. I talked about this when I covered that episode. It was the Cloud Miners, or the Cloud Minders. I can't remember the name of the planet, but whatever that planet was in the Cloud Minders, how they were a member of the Federation. I'm like, why the fuck would they let these primitive assholes who are, discriminating against half their population on a massive scale, essentially committing apartheid? Why in the fuck would the Federation let them join? But of course, that's the original series before they really sort of delve into the deeper nooks and crannies of the world building and all that kind of stuff. So that can be forgiven, but still, it's like they still need to be taken into consideration, and I still think that these guys, especially compared to those other planets, are probably one of the least offensive candidates for the Federation shown. I don't know. I would think it's okay that Picard not know, or that the Federation didn't know that minor detail, because that's why Picard's there, to learn more about them. And they would probably know the gist of it, like the main facts. They wouldn't know every tiny little detail of society. And I think the fact that they use super soldiers for their army and they have to keep them in prison, I think that is an important detail to be sure, but it's not something that general fact-finding information would find out. They're not terrible, say, Tasha Yar, not even realizing in the Justice Planet that they kill people for stepping on grass when she was there to study their law. So it's nowhere near as bad as that, for example. What laws did she study? I'm sorry, that's totally a different episode. Anyway, so yeah, I'm perfectly fine with them, and I like the job that James Cromwell does in this episode. I think, by the way, this is his first appearance in the Star Trek franchise. Of course, he's best known for playing Zefram Cochrane in First Contact movie. But I gotta say movie because differentiated from the episode. Not that you guys don't know this already. But anyway, I still need to say it. But anywho, yeah, I think he does a good job because he plays a very arrogant prick that you hate, and that's what he's meant to be. I don't think he's cardboard. I don't think he's two-dimensional. I actually think he's quite realistic for an uppity, stuck-up bureaucrat who's like, well, this isn't your concern. There's totally people like that. They totally exist. And so I think he's a very valid character, and he does it very well, and I think it works well for the story. In fact, it works well for the allegory, as I was mentioning, because I'm sure there's many U.S. senators who, when confronted about how veterans are treated, would be just as arrogant, uppity, and asshole-ish. So I think it's totally realistic. But anyway, and he does a good job at it. Anyway, let me talk about the main complaint that I hear about this episode, and that people just can't move past. And to be honest, it does bug me a little bit as well. Maybe not to the degree it apparently bugs some other people, but the fact that Roga Danar is the smartest, best person ever. Like, this is why I agree with Boimler for choosing him, because they kind of made him a Mary Sue in this script. And when I used to play the Star Trek Next Generation collectible card game back in the late 90s, I think it came out in the mid-90s, but I didn't really start playing until the late 90s. I was a bit late. But anyway, I remember his card, it was in the very first expansion. It was one of the best cards you could have. It wasn't rare, it was common, or maybe uncommon. I think it was uncommon, but it was still easy to get. And he had 9 strength and 12 cunning. And if you never played that game, that's a lot. The average of cunning and strength was like 6 or 7. I think Worf was like 8 strength. And so he was non-aligned, so you could use him with any group, with your Federation deck or your Klingon deck or Romulan deck or whatnot. So those come in handy. So I used to love that card and play it a lot. But anyway, that's sort of representative of just how badass he is. And I heard someone else complaining that he kicked Worf's ass in this episode, and they're like, "Oh, you shouldn't be able to kick Worf's ass. That's ridiculous." But no, according to that card game, he had a strength of 9, and Worf had a strength of 8, so he would win. Anyway, yeah, they made him a bit like a Mary Sue, though. That there were some things that I was okay with. I was okay with the fact that he was able to outwit them and used sleight of hand and used misdirection as his main tactic. Now the thing is, and I've heard other people say this too, the first time they were trying to hunt him down at the very start of the episode, I buy it. I buy everything, and when especially because we learn he's a super soldier who's genetically enhanced, I totally buy this. In fact, I would make the argument that he actually comes off as a super soldier in Khan, or genetically engineered super being, where Khan doesn't. I pointed this out in my review for where Khan, we were being told over and over again, oh, he's got super strength and super intelligence, and yet we don't see that. We see Kirk easily outwit him, and we see Kirk beat him over the back with a metal rod and able to knock him out. How is that super intelligent? I'm sorry, I think Khan is overrated. I think Space Heat is super overrated. But anyway, here we actually see it. They actually show rather than just tell us. We can see it before they tell us, as a matter of fact. So they don't even need to tell us, or they kind of do, so we have that information. But really, we are shown that he has superior strength and intelligence, unlike Khan, which is just a tell not show. But do they overdo it? Yeah, I mean, okay, so not the first time. The first time, I think, is all good. But Data is able to catch on to his tactics and outsmart him and beam him aboard. And part of the reason why they couldn't get it, by the way, is that he was able to block their life signs, which I've heard some people complain about. But come on. Star Trek is not scientific at all. It's all nonsense. And if they say there's some magical thing in his blood that blocks sensors, I'm just going to go with it. I don't care. But anyway, I mean, because there's worse things Star Trek has done. But anyway, so something in his body can block being detected by life signs. And so that's also gave him the edge during that first thing, because they didn't know that at the time. But once they figured it out, they're like, beam anything on board that's big enough to be a humanoid. And then when he gets in the transporter room, he starts beating the shit out of everyone, which is a good fight scene. I liked it. And I think that, Riker and Worf came, and it took 4 people to hold him down. That was good. And it showed how desperate that he wanted to get back to the colony, or wanted to get away from the prison. And so that was fine. No problem with that. It's the second one that people have problems with. And apparently, I was just watching the behind the scenes about this. Apparently, this was written by Ira Stephen Barrett on his First Day, which I didn't realize that before. I think I might have mentioned him earlier in this season and be like, oh yeah, he was involved, but he wasn't until this episode. So this is his first episode, and this is his first day, and he didn't study on Star Trek. He didn't know any of the characters. He didn't know any of the background of Star Trek, and he thought that he would have a couple days to learn. But Michael Piller was like, oh, can you write this scene in this episode for me today and have it to me at the end of the day? And he was freaked out and went to like his other writers there that asked him for help because he had no idea what was going on. And they were like, go away, we're too busy. And so he just bullshitted his way through because it was just an action scene. And Michael Piller, who, by the way, also didn't know that much about Star Trek, just took it and was like, oh, yeah, this is fine, this will work. And so a lot of people blame that for it being a bit crazy, but I don't know. Like, even if you don't know much about Star Trek, it's the fact that it's inconsistent, like within this episode or even within the own scenes. I don't know. Maybe you do need to know the characters of like Data and how, but yeah, Data and Riker and Picard, I should say, act stupid in the second scene because they already know that he has no life signs. They already know that he uses misdirection as his main tactic. Yet every time he misdirects them, Riker and Picard fall up for it like a couple of idiots. And one time when Data even pointed this out, he uses the tactic of misdirection, so it's unlikely he's headed for the cargo bay. They're like, what? Really? I'm like, Picard and Riker are not this stupid. Like, they would know from the get-go. So I don't buy that he would be able to outsmart them the second time. There's some, things he does, and like he kicks Geordi's ass and everyone in engineering. He comes out of nowhere. Like, that's fine, except for the fact that it's like he seems to go from wherever he was in the turbolift to engineering in like 12 seconds or something like that, but I don't care. So, but all that is fine. It's the fact that he is able to elude them and misdirect Data, and Data's not able to figure out what he's trying to do. That he's not trying to use a phaser to power the transporter and the cargo bay to beam himself off the ship. Like, they totally should have accounted for that. Like, Worf did catch on to the fact that he was misdirecting them and didn't leave they thought he left the ship in a suit, and he figured that now he's still in there, and so Worf tricked him, and he said, I'm leaving, I'm going to go check in stuff, and the cargo bay's open, so it sounded like the door's left, and then when Danar came out the corner, Worf was there waiting for him. It was Danar! But why was he there by himself? Why weren't his security men with him? Why didn't he somehow get backup? And also, like, during this whole hunt, like, when they figured out where he was because he would, like, use a turbolift or set a phaser or something, why didn't they beam, like, security men or, like, Worf, for example, directly to his position? Let's say for some reason they didn't. For some reason that's off the table. Shouldn't there be, like, security men stationed all over the ship? And shouldn't there, as soon as they find out that, that's where he is, there should be security men there to show up, like, less than a minute after they detect where he is. Like, they could just instantly reroute them, and they should be on him immediately. Instead, Worf is, like, casually walking around, and there doesn't seem to be any other fucking security people stationed anywhere else on the ship. And, why don't they just fucking beam Worf there? Oh, he's there. Here, Worf, let me beam you right there. So then less than, 20 seconds later, Worf will be right in front of him. Or, why don't they, as I said, they know that he can block their life signs. For example, when they found out he was in that turbolift, or they found out when he was in the Jeffrey tube, both examples where no one else was around. Why didn't they scan for something that was humanoid size and beam it back to the fucking brig? How about that? Jeez. And so I totally do not buy him getting away the second time. Oh, not to mention, the whole way this whole fight action scene started was he was being beamed aboard to the transport ship, and they're like, oh, yeah, don't worry about it. It's perfectly safe because there's only going to be a 0.5 second difference from when the force field's down and when they beam him to the ship. And so when they're beaming him aboard, he does this like Tai Chi thing. He goes, and he blocks the transporter, blows up. Now, I had always assumed that he redirected the transporter beam and landed someone on the ship. But when I was watching that scene more closely, I think maybe he actually was still there. But when he pushed the transporter beam away, it exploded. And so Worf and all the security men went flying. And there was like sparks. And by the time the dust settled, he just ran out of the room. That's what I think actually happened, which would be less ridiculous than him redirecting a transporter beam somewhere else. But still ridiculous. I'm sorry. Like, the other thing, like, that he can block life signs, I'm willing to buy that because whatever. But him sitting there going this Tai Chi, like, how fucking advanced are these? Like, these idiots who are trying to join the Federation, I don't think are as advanced as Starfleet in the 24th century. I don't think that they should have the fact that they have technology that is in fact more advanced, that he's able to do this Tai Chi and make the transporter beam go away. That's nothing anyone in the Federation or any other of their close enemies or anyone they have relations with, like the Romulans or whatever, none of them can do this shit. So why are these fuckers so advanced when they seem to be way less advanced than Starfleet? So I think this is total bullshit. I don't buy that at all. So the whole premise of that whole second chase scene was based on bullshit. It was based on logic that does not work. But so that is definitely my main complaint of the episode. But if we do leave all that aside, otherwise I think it was a very powerful episode. As I said, I like the interactions between Rurga Daynar and Counselor Troy, especially how he's hostile to her at first, and because that makes total sense. And he's very candid about what they did. It's like, a counselor did this to me, they forced me to do this, and my enhanced abilities allowed me to kill 74 times, and my enhanced memory makes me remember the face of it. And also they touched on PTSD when, the whole reason Troy went to him is she was just happened to be walking by and can sense like his extreme pain, and that's while he was sleeping. And it was implied that it was PTSD, that he could see perfectly the faces of all the people that he killed, and it still haunts him because they gave him these abilities to kill ruthlessly, but inside they're still regular people, which is actually a really great analogy for veterans who do suffer from PTSD. If you could even call it an analogy, it's kind of just a one-to-one. But so yeah, that was really good, and I bought the Data befriending him, and I think that's an interesting combination to have him make friends with Data and Troy, a non-feeling android who's also programmed like he was, and someone who's really in touch with their feelings and was helping him cope with the side of his feelings. And I also like, as I said, I like the allegory, so I like the way that they play. I think, are they the Andosians? Is that what they are? The Andosians? Whoever they are, the stupid aliens, that they're the bad guy. And because, as I said, it's an analogy for how the U.S. government disregards its traumatized or injured war veterans after they used them to win wars. And so I think, and the fact that they're just a bunch of bureaucratic, arrogant pricks who get their comeuppance at the end was very satisfying. It was extremely satisfying in the final scene. I think the final scene really makes this episode for me. It really makes it really good. Where Picard is yeah, where he, first of all, he figures out the Predator rules, which I like. You know, if you've seen the movie Predator, Arnold Schwarzenegger figured out that if you don't, like, try to threaten it or try to shoot it, it won't hurt you. It's the same with the super soldiers. And, yeah, and I like that, but that actually, like, makes them hostage, like, because now they're at a disadvantage. Now the super soldiers have all of the advantage of them, and the government's really going to be at a disadvantage in negotiating if they want to save their lives. And I like how Picard, when the James Cromwell guy is like, oh yeah, Picard, do something, and he's like, oh yeah, sure, I'm just gonna fuck off. I love that. Now, I heard other people criticize that for saying that that he all of a sudden is using the Prime Directive, whereas before he wasn't. Before he was willing to hunt down a prisoner for a different entity. But I think it's different, because first of all, he is purposely using the Prime Directive in a way because he knows he doesn't want to help these assholes and wants them to deal with the consequences of their actions. So it's not really saying, oh, I'm not going to follow the Prime Directive here, but I'll follow it here. It's more of, well, all right, there's a prisoner that's escaped from this world we're being friendly to, and we're in friendly relations, friendly negotiations, and they need our help, so let's help them. So they help them. But then they realize, ooh, there's more to it than they've been told, and they've actually mistreated this prisoner, and maybe it's not so black and white, and maybe they shouldn't be helping them, but they still, like, are willing to cooperate because they're a friendly entity. But once Rogadena on his own escapes and gets all these other super soldiers, and they all storm the Capitol, now it's an internal conflict that could decide the direction the entire society goes. So now that's kind of that's a much different situation than simply, oh, let's help transport this prisoner, to let's help determine the entire way the society will progress. Two totally different things. And also, in addition to that, it's also a case where Picard actively disagrees with how the society is choosing to function, and he sides more with the super soldiers, and so why the fuck would he interfere? So if you think about it, his decision, and I do like how he beams down to try to help, persuade them in the right direction, and of course he helps save their lives by telling them to keep their weapons down, but after that he's like, alright, well, my work's done here, you guys figure this shit out. Makes total sense, and I actually think it's badass. I think it's awesome, and I'm totally with Picard on this one. I think it's awesome, and especially if you're having an allegory for people who mistreat their veterans, and at the end the government assholes get their comeuppance. You would want that to happen in real life too. It's kind of a gratifying fiction, but gratifying. So. Yeah, I think this was a pretty powerful episode. So now, let me go ahead and thank my patrons for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. This helped me continue with the channel. I'm very humbled, very thankful for everyone's support. So I'll just give a quick shout out to Tetson, Greg Marley, Francisco Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Matty Jester, Joel Lavalles, Alessandro Migalacio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brendan Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal House. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we do have a few comments, Patreon comments on this episode. First comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, I always think about the X-Files while watching this episode. Did Chris Carter use this episode for his super soldier storyline in the X-Files? James Cromwell, first appearance in the Star Trek franchise, # let war fight, and what happens? He gets his arse beat. I never liked what Picard did. He did one thing: don't try to fight these soldiers. Great advice, Captain. How many people died before they reached the capital? Picard in later seasons would never do this. I was thinking about dropping my rating for this episode, but I decided not to for one simple reason: people can be heartless bastards sometimes. Maybe because he didn't have his Earl Grey tea that day. My rating is 10 hours of survival out of 10. Whoa, 10 out of 10. I changed what I said about everyone hating this episode. That is a high rating. Well, I still saw a lot of negative opinions on this episode, but I gotta disagree about Picard. As I mentioned in my review already, I actually think he did the right thing, because it's not his place to interfere. I mean, this prison break would have happened whether or not the Enterprise was there or not. This gets back to Enterprise playing God. If the Enterprise is never there, the same thing with Urgadana taking the capital still would have happened. And besides that, James Cromwell and those government fuckheads are in the wrong, so I think Picard did the right thing by not helping them. And I don't know if they killed anyone in the capital, because their whole goal was to ransack the capital. Anyway, so yeah. Next comment is from Norman Buchwald that says, an interesting mix of introducing in TNG a new Federation member contender where clearly not only things go wrong, but then they have the audacity to ask for help on a problem they couldn't ethically resolve. Of course, it's a brilliant metaphor on how awful the United States has been to their veterans, especially after the Vietnam War, but done rather effectively with the super soldier. And though they did not say it in this episode, the continual issue of the Federation, particularly Earth, was with genetic manipulation. Interesting that otherwise forgotten soldier was remembered fondly by Boimler in the lower decks. Again, how Picard handles this, I have to admit, is with admiration. Obviously, this planet is not ready yet to join to have the responsibility of shared technologies of the Federation. I'll give it 8 methods to even elude data out of 10. They definitely were not ready to join the Federation, but I don't fault, Picard or the Federation for at least checking them out and saying, oh, are they ready? But their conclusion is clearly no, they are not. And I think they would have to go a long way to solving the current issue before they would be considered again. Anyway, next comment is from Kyrie091, who says, because of the similar titles, I accidentally thought we were watching The Wounded. Now I'm sad because it's actually The Hunted. Be right back. I'm gonna go watch The Wounded instead. Y'all go ahead with this one. I'll catch up with you later. I personally don't see how The Hunted, The Wounded are anything alike. One's being hunted. Well, I guess you could have a wounded animal that's being hunted, but still. Picard, O'Brien and the thing with Bob Gutton, what was his name? Captain Maxwell. They weren't hunted, they were just wounded. Or maybe the Cardassians were hunted, but regardless, I don't know. I just know these episode titles so well. Next comment is from Brandon Neal House, who says, I always get this episode mixed up with Transfigurations. Why does everyone get this episode mixed up with other episodes? Anyway, I always get this episode mixed up with Transfigurations, but it doesn't make much difference as they are both crap. The Angosians, that's the Angosians. Yes, thank you, Brandon. The Angosians are unbearably smug. And what in the 9 billion names of God is James Cromwell wearing? Can always count on you, Brandon, to point out bad costuming. Anyway, how can someone manage to writhe around in mid-transport? And another phaser set to explode. Give me a fucking break. Picard finally decides he's done with all the super soldier shit and invokes the non-interference rule when he should have done from the first, which kind of negates the point of this episode. Amusing. There was a point to begin with. Assuming there was a point to begin with. A waste of time. I'd rather they keep proposed bloodbath in the episode. It may have livened it up. 2 undetectable life signs out of 10. I already talked about how I actually think it makes sense that why they would consider them for the Federation and why they would help him get a prisoner, and then why Picard would be like, nah, actually, let's not get involved. I think it makes complete and total sense in that he was a badass and that he did the right thing, but that is just me. Now, as for his managing to writhe around in mid-transport, I never mind that because Star Trek is totally inconsistent with this. We see people talking in transport, sometimes like in Star Trek 2, and then we see like Barclay like seeing stuff in transport, is able like to move around and grab stuff. So Star Trek's always been inconsistent with this, and the technology thing is something I never cared about to begin with. It's not his moving around transport that bothered me. It's the fact that he was able to magically deflect the transporter beam that bothers me. Like, I think that was bullshit. But that is just me. So anyway, my rating for The Hunted out of 10 is going to be an 8, extremely good. Now, I will admit I was torn between a 7 and an 8, even while I was recording this review just like a couple seconds ago. As I was talking, I was trying to decide, like, is this a 7 or an 8? Because, yeah, I really like the message of the episode. I really like the allegory. I really like how they portray Rogadena. I really like how they use Troy in this episode. I really like the scenes between Rogadena and Troy and Data, and I really like what Picard does at the end. I totally agree with him. I think it's badass. But that whole second chase scene, I think, is just a big load of bullshit. So, and it really, there's a lot of things, like that whole sequence, which will last for, 10 minutes or something? It's just bad. And it just doesn't make any sense. And it's just frustrating, like stuff like he's able to, like, push the transporter beam away, and then the fact that Picard and Riker start acting like total morons, like, oh, was he doing this direction? Really? Oh. And then why don't they just fucking beam Worf to him? Or why don't they just scan for anything large enough to be a humanoid and beam that back to the brig? Why don't they even try to... And also, by the way, I don't think I even pointed this out before, I don't buy that he outsmarted Data the second time. I think Data would have been on top of him, and Data shouldn't figure it out. The crux of it is, what this all boils down to, is that the plot required for him to escape the second time. And this is Ira Steven Bear's first time writing Star Trek when he knew nothing about Star Trek, and he wrote that scene. And didn't do a good enough job making me buy that Rogadena would be able to escape a second time, because I don't buy it. So that really bugs me, and so that made me thinking that I should push it down to a 7. But then, all the other stuff I really like, but ultimately, my ultimate decision to go with an 8 was the fact that it's a great allegory. And sometimes when you have a great allegory with an emotional impact that works, that overrides or, outweighs, like, bullshit writing. A prime example to me is the Deep Space Nine episode Past Tense, which has some of the worst time travel logic I've ever seen anywhere, let alone Star Trek. But the characters and the allegory are so damn good that I have to sort of overlook that stupid nonsense to say, no, this is actually a really great episode. And I think it's the same situation here, where I think the power of, the commentary they're making on how veterans are mistreated, and Rugadena are finally, getting what what's he's deserved and fighting back against these arrogant pricks of bureaucrats. And that's very gratifying to see, and I think it's powerful, and like the emotional portrayal, personal portrayal of the character bits with Troy, and Troy being used right, as I said, which is not something they often do. And so I gotta appreciate that. So all this does to override the bullshit second chase scene, where I will give it an 8 out of 10. So yeah, I think my patrons were actually kind of split on this one. I know Stephen Kennedy gave it a 9. And Brandon gave it a 2. What did Norman? Norman gave it an 8, so just like me. So yeah, we're kind of more on the same page there. Yeah, so I'll give it an 8 out of 10. So that is it for my review of The Hunted. So I'll just see what's coming up next on my channel, just to see where we're at, if I can bloody find. All right, here's my schedule. Okay, so Wednesday will be my review for The High Ground. Thursday I'll be over on Patreon for another revisited, this time revisiting my review for Deja Q, which will be over on my Patreon for the Patreon supporters. And then on Saturday I'll be back here on my YouTube channel for a public review for A Matter of Perspective. And then Monday, back over on Patreon for another revisited, this time for Yesterday's Enterprise. Ooh, big one. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek Next Generation and doing many more videos, many more Star Trek shows, and many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.